My wife is not a gamer. Apart from some Candy Crush and a little bit of Secret Society, gaming doesn't really interest her. So I challenged myself to explain the things about gaming that might pique her interest. When I posed the question to her, she wanted to know, how do the stories work compared to games where you defeat the enemy or complete all the levels? This response seemed a little weird at first, because you still had to defeat all the enemies, complete the puzzles, in order to complete the game so that you get the full experience. However, what she wanted to know is how the narrative informs the gameplay and how these pieces fit together to form the experience as a whole. Video game stories are vast and complex, but are fundamentally different from more traditional forms of fiction. John Robson and Aaron Meskin defined video game narratives as self-involving, interactive fictions, in which the player can interact and influence the experience of the game. Unlike books, movies, or series, games require active participation from the player. But even within this realm, there are way too many variations of video games. To this we turn to Rules of Play Game Design Fundamentals, where Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman break it down into 4 types of narratives in game design. These are the embedded narrative, the emergent narrative, the evocative narrative, and the enacted narrative. First up, we have the embedded narrative. These are predetermined stories whose direction the player follows. These are often cinematic, but usually the player actions will not affect the overall narrative. This is about the experience. God of War, Uncharted, Horizon Zero Dawn are all excellent examples of the embedded narrative. Next up, we have the emergent narrative. These are stories that are influenced by the player actions and decisions within the world. These harken back to the Goosebumps, choose your own adventure books. You craft your own story. The evocative narrative focuses on connotations and tapping into the knowledge of the player. This focus emphasizes the idea of show, don't tell, allowing developers to evoke emotions within the player. Next up, we have the enacted narrative. These forms of narratives rely on the player developing the character, leveling up and obtaining items to complete the quest. These are focused on building a powerful character to enact change within the world. Now we have to understand that evocative and enacted narratives are a little bit harder to define as full narrative styles. Instead, they form as a part of video game literacy, an inherent understanding of video games and its use of coded language. I will try to explain on this in a later video. What is important is that all games use some combination of these narratives, usually with one standing out as the most dominant. So the big question comes in, how do these narrative styles improve the overall video game experience? Before I embarked on my grand odyssey of explanation, I asked my wife what she thought were common stories in video games. She said saving the world or rescuing somebody. Essentially an excuse for the action. While this is true for many earlier games, I do think embedded narratives have changed drastically over the years. So I chose a game with an incredible story and doesn't include either. I chose God of War.
And he's open to letting you roll into his mouth to look inside.
Warning! There will be spoilers for God of War's main story up ahead. God of War is the 2018 sequel reboot to the franchise about the Greek demigod murdering his way through the pantheon. So how is this game any different?
Everything is different, boy.
The core story focus is on Kratos, a Greek god who now resides in Norse mythology, and his son Atreus, grieving the loss of Faye, their wife and mother respectively. The two set out to fulfill a final wish, to scatter ashes over the highest peak in the 9 realms. That's it. No world-ending threat, no rescue.
Father, help me!
So what makes it so compelling, and how does this inform the action? On paper, This seems incredibly boring for a video game narrative. All you have to do is head to the highest peak and throw some ashes. That shouldn't be a problem for a demigod who decimated Olympus. But instead they gave Kratos a task that he could not solve with his brute strength. Fatherhood.
I do not know how to do this without you.
So let's do a quick synopsis of the narrative. We open with the cremation of Faye, the wife and mother of Kratos and Atreus, as we mentioned before. The two are tasked with scattering her ashes from the peak of the highest mountain in the 9 realms. So the two embark on a quest across the 9 realms, well, actually it's more like 4 that you actually go to gain access to Jotunheim, the land of the giants, throwing half the characters of the poetic Edda at the two, uncovering the cruelty of the Aesir, and discovering the mysterious disappearance of the giants. Throughout the journey they are hunted by Balder, the son of Odin, for reasons unknown, xenophobia and general douchehousery. And there you have it, that was my terrible synopsis. Now on to the good stuff. The narrative slots nicely into the hero's journey, the narrative template for the transformation of the hero, as coined by Joseph Campbell in his book The Hero's Journey. In the hero's journey there are 12 key beats which dictate the change of the character. So let's have a look at it and how it slots into God of War. We open with the ordinary world. We see Kratos now residing in Midgard with his son. Then we get the call to adventure, and that is fulfilling Faye's final wish to have the ashes scattered from the highest peak. While this seems to be the traditional call, it's actually Kratos being uncertain of his own ability to care and raise for his son while on this journey. He's afraid of sharing his truth with his son.
Our son is not ready to carry your ashes to the top of the mountain, and neither am I.
Then we have the refusal of the call. Kratos is apprehensive about Atreus' ability to survive and fulfill the journey, let alone carry Faye. The two are forced onto the journey when the stranger, who we later learn is Balder, pitches up at their home.
Gather your things. We are leaving.
Thought I wasn't ready.
You are not. We have no choice now. Prove me wrong.
So now before we got meeting the mentor, that's Freya,
Hello, Freya. Been a long time.
a benevolent witch who helps guide them. She has a maternal caring for Atreus.
Will you help me?
Of course.
And serves a pretty big purpose later on in the narrative. Then we get crossing the first threshold, and that's the retrieval of the light of Alfheim. In this moment, Kratos inadvertently leaves Atreus to fend for himself, while he desperately tries to reconnect with Faye in the light. This is the first instance where Kratos sees Atreus' capability to look after himself.
Waited and I waited, but you wouldn't come out! So I pulled you out!
Boy! I was gone only... moments.
No! You've been gone a long, long time! I didn't know what to do! You left me here! Again! Why don't you care?
That's impossible.
At number 6 we have test allies and enemies. We reach the peak of the mountain but learn that Balder with Magni and Modi are hunting them.
Tattooed man. Tracks show he now travels with a child. Where would they go next?
And we meet Mimir, who joins the duo as their guide.
There's only one person alive who can get you where you need to go. And luckily for you, my schedule's wide open.
At number 7, we approach the innermost cave. This is where Mimir informs them that the highest peak is not in Midgard.
Oh, then you've come to the wrong place, little brother. The highest peak in all the realms is not here in Midgard.
It is in Jotunheim, which has been sealed off by the giants, so getting there will not be an easy task. At number 8 we have the ordeal. Kratos struggles to trust Atreus with the knowledge of his godhood.
The boy will want answers.
That will be my problem.
Whatever you're hiding, you cannot protect him forever.
Boy, the longer you wait to tell him his true nature, the more damage you do. He will resent you, and you may lose him forever.
There is much about me I would not have him know.
So you value your privacy more than your son, eh?
Which leads to his illness. Kratos is left helpless and turns to Freya for assistance.
The boy has fallen ill! Freya! He is ill.
Inside. This is no ordinary illness. The boy's true nature, your true nature, fights within him.
I did this to him.
Number 9 we have seizing of the sword. Kratos returns home to literally fetch the weapons of the past, the blades of chaos. He accepts himself and realizes what he must do to save his son.
You will always be a monster.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
At number 10 we have the road back. This is where Kratos reveals his godhood to Atreus, who grows overconfident with this information.
You killed against my wishes. You lost control.
This leads to the destruction of the Jotunheim bridge and casts him back into Helheim.
Boy,
At number 11 we have the resurrection. This is kind of a two-parter. This is their literal escape from Helheim and their reconciliation as father and son. The second is after the death of Balder. This is the moment where Kratos trusts Atreus with the entirety of his past.
I'm from a land called Sparta. I made a deal with a god that cost me my soul. I killed many who were deserving. And many who were not. I killed my father.
But also reminds him that that's not who he has to be.
No. We will be the gods we choose to be. Not those who have been.
And finally we have the return with the elixir. I'd love to say the moment that the father and son spread their beloved mother's ashes is the moment, but it's not. It's the moment where Kratos entrusts Atreus to carry Faye's ashes.
Boy. Carry her.
See, they don't know what dangers lurk ahead, even though there are no more at this point. Kratos finally accepts that his son is capable of fulfilling the final part of this journey on his own. At this point, he shared everything he knows with his son.
We do it together. Son.
here comes the kicker. How does this narrative fit into the gameplay? For all you non-gamers, there's an annoying mechanic we'll call babysitting. It's pretty self-explanatory where you, the player, have to ensure the survival of an NPC. This can often be frustrating because they're helpless or they get in the way of your progress. God of War uses this ingrained video game literacy against the player in the beginning. You think Atreus won't be much of a help and will probably need to be constantly protected for the entirety of the game. But Atreus is key to your survival.
Moon Midgard Sun. Moon Midgard Sun.
You need to use his skill set to progress. You, as the player, have to trust him. Let's look at some of the key moments from the narrative. Remember the Light of Alfheim?
Careful, boy.
He's the one who's able to use it with his bow. Not only to open paths, but also to stun potential threats. He's the only one capable of making certain enemies such as those annoying revenants vulnerable to attack. Kratos simply can't do this alone. You, need Atreus' help to complete this journey.
Let me teach you something.
He becomes even more invaluable to open up bosses to attacks or to prevent you from being blindsided or overwhelmed. This is why it is extremely frustrating when he becomes blinded by the arrogance of godhood. He simply does what he wants instead of listening to you.
Sorry, sir.
It's a harsh realization of how you've been dependent on his abilities up until this point. Without him, the game is much harder. The second aspect is how the story motivates you and helps you to inform character decisions. When Atreus falls ill and you have to return to fetch the Blades of Chaos, which is a fantastic piece of evocative narrative, but I'm not getting into that today. As a player, you feel driven to push through the enemy hordes. You know what's at stake, and you're willing to carve a path through anything that stands in your way. This is actually a common trope within video game narrative design, using emotional connection to the characters built through the narrative to understand the decision-making process. Many games which have an embedded narrative often want you to experience the story as it unfolds. It's less about you, the player, influencing the narrative, but the narrative influencing you. You need to understand the decisions made by the characters. Remember the end of The Last of Us? I bet your mind was already made up about saving Ellie in that final section of the game. This is because you escorted it to this point. You understand the trauma Joel experienced with his daughter. You understand the bond formed between Joel and Ellie. You understand that Joel deserves happiness because you protected her through Joel. The narrative builds tension into this gameplay loop, and you may feel that urgency to complete the task before it's too late, and the frustration as more enemies stand in your way. It's because you're invested in the narrative, and these obstacles are hindering your journey. After all, it's your journey. Only you can ensure the task is complete. And with that, we've completed the embedded narrative. With the narrative a core component of the game, it invests you, the player, in the journey of the characters and drives you to keep playing. Will they have a happy ending or gain the closure they deserve? This is all dependent on you.
We will be the gods we choose to be.
Next time we'll look at how you are given the power to influence the world. Will you seek chaos? Or will you bring harmony in the emergent narrative? As always, I am that lost soul. I am that wandering wanderer. I am that nomad Shad. I'd like to thank the following people for their assistance in bringing this video to life. If you enjoyed this video, why not leave a like and subscribe?